The car that brought Kayamika to the city was bigger than any room she'd ever slept in. As she clutched her little Gonna-must-go bag, seated beside the driver, her eyes darted from the wide tarred roads to the endless rows of tall buildings and shiny cars. Everything overwhelmed her. Her sandals had dust from the village, her wrapper was too tight, and her heart pounded with both excitement and fear. She had never left her village in a bony state before, never imagined she'd end up working for a Lagos billionaire. All she knew was that Madame Ngozi, a fair, flashy woman who had visited the village for her cousin's wedding, had chosen her out of pity and promised her a better life in the city. "You'll help around the house, clean, serve tea, simple things," Madame had said. But as the mansion gates opened and she saw the sheer size of the compound, Kayamika realized she might be in over her head. Inside the mansion, she was welcomed by silence and marble floors that clicked under her cheap slippers. She met other staff, the chef, the driver, and one cold-faced butler named Charles, who barely looked her way. But it was Madame Ngozi who introduced her with a loud voice and forced smile. "This is Kayamika, my little project from the village. Fresh from the farm, but I'll polish her well." The way the other staff chuckled made Kayamika's cheeks burn, but she bowed and greeted everyone respectfully. She called Ngozi auntie, and meant it. She saw her as a savior. She wanted to serve well, be good, and not disappoint. Every morning she woke up before the cook mopped floors, fetched water for the plants, and helped fold laundry even when it wasn't her duty. Her eyes sparkled with gratitude, not pride. She smiled at everyone and prayed out loud as she worked. To the house staff, she was amusing. To Ngozi, she was a pet project. But to Damien, the man of the house, she was still invisible. Damien Okeke was not often at home. A 35-year-old tech billionaire, he lived mostly in his private office or traveled for meetings abroad. Tall, dark-skinned, with piercing eyes that rarely betrayed emotion, he was admired for his intellect and wealth, but feared for his silence. Even his fiancée Ngozi tiptoed around his moods. When Damien finally returned from a trip one Sunday morning, Kayamika barely saw his face. She bowed deeply when he walked past, clutching her wrapper tightly and looking at the ground. He didn't respond, but he paused just for a second to glance at the new maid. It was brief, unnoticed by everyone. But in that quiet blink, the winds of the story began to change, though no one knew it yet, not even Damien himself. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon. Kayamika had just finished scrubbing the back veranda and was wiping sweat from her forehead with the edge of her wrapper. Her blouse, which was a hand-me-down from the cook's daughter, was too loose, and her bra strap had been slipping down all morning. As she walked past the side of the compound toward the staff quarters, she paused beside one of the luxury SUVs parked in the shade. Glancing left and right and seeing no one around, she lifted her arm inside her blouse and adjusted her bra strap quickly. She wasn't trying to seduce anyone. It was a pure, unconscious act of modesty. But what she didn't know was that inside the tinted car she leaned against, Damien sat in the back seat, eyes lowered to his tablet, only to glance up at the exact moment she adjusted herself. At first, Damien didn't register what he saw. But then, something held his attention. It wasn't the movement, it was the sheer innocence of it. She wasn't flaunting anything. She didn't know anyone was watching. She didn't do it with pride or awareness. It was the most unconscious, unguarded act he'd seen in years, and it unsettled him. Not because it was provocative, but because it was real. Kayamika adjusted her strap like a child fixing her wrapper at a village stream. He looked away immediately, feeling both ashamed and confused. But when he looked back again, she was gone. The memory stayed. The moment, though small and fleeting, cracked something open. For the first time he saw her, not just as a maid, not as Ngozi's little village charity, but as a person. A young woman fragile, untouched by city pride. He shut his tablet and leaned back. Something had shifted. Kayamika continued her day like nothing happened. She helped clean the windows, fetched groceries from the gate, and even sang a church hymn while arranging shoes in the foyer. She didn't know she had been seen. She didn't know her tiny, accidental gesture had awakened something in the quiet, watchful man upstairs. That night, Damien walked past the kitchen just as she was arranging plantains in the basket. Their eyes met. She bowed immediately and smiled. "Good evening, sir." He nodded slowly, for the first time. She didn't think much of it. But for him, it was the beginning of an internal war, between reason and something that felt dangerously close to longing. In the days that followed, Damien found himself noticing things about Kayamika he hadn't seen before. It wasn't just her innocence. It was the way she moved through the house with gratitude, never rushing, never complaining, even when Ngozi barked instructions at her like a dog. She helped the old gateman sew a missing button on his shirt. She gave her meat to the cook's daughter when food was short. She lit candles and prayed for everyone in the house during blackout evenings, including Auntie Ngozi and Oga Damien, whispering their names like they were saints. Damien stood once outside the corridor, hearing her voice trail off in prayer from the servants' quarters. "Bless Oga. Keep him from evil. Give him peace. Let him not be angry this week." He stepped away, chest tight. No one prayed for him, not even his own mother. Who was this girl? During breakfast one morning, he observed her serve tea with quiet elegance. She always used both hands to place the cup down, slightly bowed, then backed away gently. It wasn't trained, it was natural. When she smiled, it wasn't a charm, it was to honor. One morning, she helped the driver's wife deliver a baby in the backyard, boiling water, cutting cloths, holding the woman's hand through contractions, all while Ngozi was inside, getting her nails done. When Damien heard about it later, he walked into the back kitchen, where Kayamika was cleaning blood from towels. She looked up at him and smiled softly, tired but peaceful. "The baby is a boy," she said, holding up the cloth like a midwife's medal. "He looks like his father." Damien said nothing, but his eyes rested on her longer than they should have. Ngozi, however, noticed. She began catching those brief glances. She caught Damien smiling at Kayamika's awkward jokes. She watched how his eyes softened when the maid passed by, eyes that never softened for her anymore. And while she didn't say it yet, a storm was already rising inside her. She had brought this girl in. She had dressed her in city clothes, taught her how to greet, even gave her body spray. And now, her own fiancé was looking at the maid like she was made of gold. But for now, she held her peace, hiding jealousy behind jokes. Oga Damien seems to like his new prayer warrior. She'd laugh one evening, loud enough for everyone to hear. Kayamika only blushed and continued mopping. But Damien? He looked away, troubled, for the softness that was growing in him had no words yet, only silence. Ngozi sat on the edge of a living room couch, legs crossed, swirling her wine glass as her friends from the club admired the expansive mansion. They were all dressed in lace, lashes bold, nails long, a parade of money and mockery. "This is the one I brought from a village," Ngozi said, pointing proudly to Kayamika, who was carrying a tray of chin-chin and zobo, fresh like morning yam. "Obedient like cow in dry season," she added with a laugh, and the women giggled. Kayamika bowed and offered them drinks, her hands trembling slightly. One of the guests, a light-skinned woman with a sharp voice, poked her. "Say something, village girl," she teased. "Do you know how to use perfume, or you still rub shea butter?" Kayamika gave a shy, loving smile. "Na only ori and coconut oil I dey use, ma." The women roared in laughter, not realizing the joke was on them. She was honest, unashamed, and uncorrupted. Ngozi didn't hate Kayamika at this point. In fact, she still spoke well of her. To outsiders, she boasted about her as a symbol of her own benevolence. "You know, not every woman can raise a bush girl and make her polished," she told her friend Amara. She bought Kayamika a new wrapper, taught her how to iron pleats properly, even gave her one of her old handbags to use when going on errands. Kayamika, in her loving innocence, saw Ngozi as an older sister and savior. She would kneel to greet her in the morning, offer her snacks from the market, and often ended her prayers with, "And bless Auntie Ngozi for bringing me to this mansion." But Ngozi's kindness was layered, not rooted in love, but in superiority. She liked Kayamika the way someone likes a pet, tame, loyal, and dependent. As long as Kayamika remained beneath her, she didn't feel threatened. But what Ngozi didn't see coming was the subtle shift. How Damien began slowing down when Kayamika walked past. How his stoic eyes would trail after her, not with lust, but with something softer, curiosity, maybe admiration. And while Ngozi was too proud to ask direct questions, her instincts were sharper than she gave herself credit for. One afternoon, she walked into the lounge and caught Damien watching the CCTV footage on his laptop. Kayamaka was in the corner of a screen, praying in the backyard. "What are you watching?" Ngozi asked casually. Damien quickly closed the tab. "Nothing. Just checking the cameras." She didn't push, but something inside her clicked. She began to see her little charity project differently. Not as a harmless village girl, but as a growing shadow. One that stretched dangerously close to the man she was supposed to marry. It started with a look. Ngozi walked into the dining room and saw Damien, who barely smiled at anyone, letting out a chuckle as Kayamaka tried to explain how in her village, goats once ate her WAC form. "They chewed the corner where my center number was," she said, wide-eyed and gesturing with her fingers. Damien burst into rare laughter. It wasn't loud, but it was real. Ngozi stood still for a second, invisible to both of them. That night, she stared at herself in the mirror and whispered, "What is he laughing at? Is it the goats? Or her stupid innocence?" But even then, she told herself she was overthinking it. "A man like Damien cannot fall for that," she muttered, brushing her hair more aggressively. Yet, when she joined him in bed, he barely spoke, and when she reached for his hand, he pulled it away, pretending to sleep. Days later, Ngozi made the first dig, playful but laced with venom. As Kayamaka served lunch, Ngozi tilted her head and said loudly, "You've gained weight, oh. Maybe it's Lego's food or the eyes of a certain Oga watching you." Kayamaka blushed, confused. "Me? I'm still the same, auntie." The staff chuckled awkwardly. Damien didn't say a word, but his eyes narrowed. That evening, when Kayamaka brought him juice in his study, he simply said, "Ignore what anyone says. Just be yourself." She smiled and nodded. "Yes, sir. I will." She left the room beaming, completely unaware that her growing charm was becoming a threat to someone who once saw her as a project. But Ngozi had started watching now, watching every glance, every smile, every whisper of gratitude that passed between Kayamaka and Damien like invisible fire. What hurt Ngozi more was not just that Damien was changing, but that he was changing for someone so beneath her. She had worked so hard to be the kind of woman a billionaire would marry. She wore designer lace, spoke fluent English, knew how to swirl wine at functions, and bragged about her MBA from South Africa. And yet, here he was, melting, softening, over a girl who couldn't pronounce entrepreneur, without choking on the word. That evening, when her friend Amara came to visit, she pulled her close and whispered, "You know Damien is acting strange? I think that small goat he brought in is using village jazz." Amara laughed. "Are you serious?" Ngozi narrowed her eyes. "I'll deal with it. I just want to be sure first." But that made her days of being pampered are numbered. It was a Sunday afternoon when the porcelain teacup slipped from Kayamaka's fingers and crashed to the marble floor. The sound echoed like a gunshot. Ngozi, who was scrolling through her phone, looked up and froze. The other staff held their breath. "Do you know how much that cup costs?" she asked, rising slowly. Kayamaka dropped to her knees, trembling. "I'm sorry, auntie. It was slippery. I didn't mean to." The slap came before the sentence could finish. A hot, resounding slap across her cheek. The tray clattered to the ground as Kayamaka held her face, stunned more by the humiliation than the pain. "You think you're special, ABI?" Ngozi hissed. "You think because Oga is smiling at you, you can break whatever you like?" Kayamaka shook her head, her eyes wet. "No, auntie. I swear. I would never." Before another word could be spoken, Damien entered the room. He had heard the commotion from upstairs. His eyes scanned the scene, the broken cup, the tears on Kayamaka's face, the redness of her cheek. "What happened here?" he asked, voice calm but firm. Ngozi opened her mouth to explain, but he raised a hand. "Don't. I saw everything on the upstairs camera." A heavy silence fell. Kayamaka turned toward him, startled. "Sir, I didn't mean." He looked at her and said, "It's okay. Go and rest." She hesitated. "Go, Kayamaka." She bowed and shuffled out, hands trembling, eyes down. Damien turned to Ngozi. whose face had paled slightly. If she makes a mistake, you correct her. You don't hit her like a child. Ngozi laughed awkwardly. So now you're defending her? Damien didn't answer. He walked away. Kayamika cried that night, not because of the slap, but because she thought she had caused a rift between Auntie Ngozi and Oga Damien. She blamed herself, praying again and again for peace to return. Father in heaven, she whispered in her small bed behind the kitchen, don't let me be the cause of trouble in this house. Touch Auntie's heart, and touch Oga too. But while Kayamika prayed for Ngozi's heart to soften, Ngozi lay in her king-sized bed, gripping her phone like a dagger. Her hands shook with rage. Damien had embarrassed her. Over a maid. Something had to give. And Kayamika, with all her innocence and prayers, was about to learn that even the kindest souls can still be targeted, especially when they unknowingly stir the insecurities of a woman who believes she owns the world. It was on one of those unusually quiet evenings that Kayamika, with a tray of sliced fruits and groundnuts, found herself seated near the veranda just outside the main lounge. The cook had asked her to wait there for instructions, and since Damien was in the study and Ngozi hadn't returned from the salon, no one had given her orders. She stared at the compound gate, humming a soft hymn about grace, when suddenly she noticed Damien walking toward her. Flustered, she tried to stand quickly, but the tray slipped and the oranges rolled to the floor. "Ah, sorry, sir," she muttered, falling to her knees to pick them up. But to her surprise, Damien bent down beside her, helping her retrieve them. "Relax, it's okay," he said, his voice unexpectedly warm. Kayamika smiled nervously and said, "In my village, if fruit falls from your hand in front of a big man, it means good luck is coming." Damien chuckled faintly, the corner of his mouth lifting as he said, "Then I hope I'm your good luck." She didn't understand the weight of his words. She simply laughed, believing it was a joke. But to Damien, that moment was the first time he allowed himself to wish for something impossible. They sat for a while, not as employer and maid, but as two people from different worlds finding unexpected connection. Kayamika told stories of her village life. How goats would chase children in the mornings, how her mother used to fry Gary with singing, and how the moon in the village always looked brighter because there were no streetlights to compete with it. Damien listened, truly listened, in a way he hadn't in years. She was funny without trying, sincere without filter, and graceful without polish. She asked him nothing about money, didn't mention his cars, and didn't ask for anything. At one point, she turned to him and said, "Olga, you look like someone who has not laughed in a long time." Damien was stunned, not because it was rude, but because it was true. No one had ever dared say that to him. "I laugh," he replied. "Not the same type," she said simply. "There's the one that comes from teeth, and the one that comes from inside your chest." And again she smiled, as if she'd just given him a gift. Damien didn't reply. His heart did. From inside the upstairs window, Ngozi stood watching, her manicure forgotten. She had come home silently, removed her heels at the entrance, and followed the sound of voices until she saw the two of them, her billionaire fiancé and her housemaid, talking like old friends. It wasn't flirtation. That would have been easier to attack. It was worse, it was comfort. Damien was comfortable with her, laughing, listening, leaning back without his usual stiffness. And the look on Kayamika's face was not seduction, it was awe. Genuine, heartfelt admiration. Ngozi's stomach turned. She closed the curtain slowly and exhaled sharply. "Let's see how long that foolishness lasts," she whispered. "I'll remind both of them who owns this house." The next few days were filled with awkwardness. Ngozi didn't scream, didn't slap, didn't even frown. That was how Kayamika knew something had changed. The calm was not peace, it was plotting. She would call Kayamika sweetheart in front of guests, pat her on the head like a child, and constantly ask her about her village, as if narrating a National Geographic documentary. "So, Kayamika, how do you people brush in the bush? Still using sticks, or have you discovered toothbrush?" she would ask, loud enough for everyone to hear. Kayamika would smile and respond earnestly, not sensing the mockery. "We still use chewing stick in the morning, but my uncle bought us 2 toothbrushes last Christmas." Everyone would laugh. Ngozi would grin with tight teeth. Damien, however, watched in silence, his gaze colder than usual. He saw what Ngozi was doing, weaponizing kindness to humiliate. At one dinner, Ngozi turned to Kayamaka and asked casually, "You know you've become Oga's favorite person, right? Don't be surprised if he calls you my village queen next." The room fell quiet. Kayamaka blinked, confused. "No, Auntie, Oga is just nice to me. He's nice to everybody." Ngozi's laughter was loud, high-pitched, and fake. See, humility. This one wants to collect husband and still be humble about it. Damien dropped his cutlery slowly. "Ngozi, that's enough." Her eyes widened, fake laughing again. "I'm joking now. Abi, we can't play in this house again." She sipped her wine, but her heart pounded like a war drum. That one sentence from Damien, that low, cold warning, confirmed what she feared. Something was indeed changing. And if she didn't fight it now, she would lose everything. The worst part for Ngozi wasn't just the fear of losing Damien. It was the insult to her pride. She had built her identity around being the woman fit for a billionaire. She wore class like perfume, spoke with false British polish, and framed their relationship on Instagram as power couple goals. She had hosted charity balls, managed PR scandals, and carefully curated their image as the ideal elite couple. And now, that image was being threatened by a girl who didn't even own a phone. A girl who smiled while sweeping corridors. A girl who prayed with eyes closed and hands raised like a deaconess. Ngozi began to obsess, checking CCTV cameras, reading Kayamaka's diary, which only contained prayer requests, and even asking the drivers subtle questions. The more she searched, the more frustrated she became. Because Kayamaka wasn't trying to steal anything. And that innocence was more dangerous than seduction. The birthday dinner was Ngozi's idea. It was small, intimate, with a few rich friends, candles, and soft music. Kayamaka was told to wear a white blouse and wrapper, so you look clean beside the champagne, Ngozi had joked. Everything was set up to make Kayamaka feel out of place. The crystal glasses, the expensive menu, the subtle, mocking glances. But Kayamaka, being who she was, smiled through it all. She served each guest politely, her tray balanced, her voice gentle. When Ngozi asked her to recite the village hymn she always sings, Kayamaka obeyed, standing nervously and singing a simple Igbo chorus about blessings falling like rain. The guests clapped, amused more than impressed. "How cute," one lady said. "Like watching Animal Planet, but in real life." Kayamaka blushed, still smiling. Damien sat quietly, his fists clenched beneath the table. Then came the final blow. Ngozi raised her glass and said, "Let's toast to my maid, the only girl who can break a cup, burn jollof rice, and still be everyone's favorite." Laughter echoed. Kayamaka's face tightened, but she smiled and bowed slightly. "Thank you, Auntie." She didn't understand why her chest hurt. She didn't know the word for it, humiliation. It was new to her. All she knew was that something had shifted in the air. Even Damien looked uncomfortable. After dessert, as she cleared the plates, she dropped a fork and bent to pick it, only to hear one of the guests whisper, "Even the way she bends is seductive." These village girls and the others chuckled. Kayamaka pretended not to hear. But her heart, tender and unguarded, cracked just a little. Later that night, Damien walked into the kitchen and saw her scrubbing a pot more than necessary. "Are you okay?" he asked. Kayamaka forced a smile. "Yes, sir. I'm sorry if I embarrassed you today." Damien frowned. "You didn't embarrass anyone." She nodded. "Auntie said it was a joke. I should learn how to laugh more." Damien stared at her for a long moment. Then he whispered, "You don't need to change anything. They should be the ones learning from you." Kayamaka looked up, her eyes wide. She didn't fully understand what he meant, but the way he said it made her throat tighten. "Thank you, sir," she whispered. And for the first time, as Damien left the room, she stood still, hand on her chest, not because of fear, but because something inside her was quietly waking up. It was around midnight when Damien walked into the corridor and paused. He had just finished reviewing a business proposal in his home office, but his mind was restless. The echoes of Kayamaka's song from the dinner earlier still rang in his head, not just as melody, but as meaning. He stepped out to get fresh air when he heard soft sobs, faint, muffled, coming from the kitchen area. Carefully, he followed the sound until he reached the corner of the staircase near the servants' quarters. There she was, Kayamika, curled up on the bare tile floor with her knees drawn to her chest, arms wrapped tightly around herself, crying silently. Damien's breath caught in his throat. She wasn't wailing or seeking attention. She was hiding her pain like it was shameful to feel hurt. He didn't speak at first. He just stood there, invisible in the shadows, watching her rock herself like a little child, whispering, "Don't cry, Kayamika. You'll make Ani angry. Be strong. Be strong." Eventually, he took a step forward. The movement startled her. She wiped her face with her wrapper and jumped to her feet. "Sir. I'm sorry, sir. I wasn't sleeping. I just sat for a little." Her voice cracked from the dryness of her throat. Damien raised his hand gently. "You don't have to explain. I heard you." She tried to speak again, but tears pooled in her eyes. "I didn't mean to disgrace you in front of your guests," she whispered. "I didn't know they would laugh at me like that." Damien moved closer, his voice lower. "You didn't disgrace me. They disgraced themselves. You showed strength I've not seen in anyone in a long time." Kayamika blinked in confusion. "But I'm just a maid," she said. Damien shook his head. "You're not just anything." For a moment, it felt like time slowed. The only sound between them was the rhythm of breathing and the hum of the inverter. He wanted to say more, wanted to tell her how much her sincerity had touched him, how her presence had begun to unsettle the cold walls he'd built for years. But he couldn't. Not yet. Not while Ngozi still slept upstairs in his bed. Not while his mother and her family were planning their wedding and announcing it on Instagram. So instead, he said nothing. He only took off his jacket and draped it over her trembling shoulders. "Sleep inside tonight. It's cold." And then he turned and walked away, leaving Kayamika standing there like a statue, holding the jacket like it was sacred. She didn't know what his silence meant, but for the first time, her tears were not just from pain. They were from something warmer, something terrifyingly close to hope. From that night forward, the air between Damien and Ngozi began to change. It wasn't explosive, not yet, but it was tense, like a strained string that would snap at the wrong touch. Damien became less present in the bedroom, often sleeping in his study and claiming exhaustion. Conversations that once lasted hours were reduced to grunts and nods. When Ngozi asked if he liked her new outfit or if he would attend a mutual friend's birthday, he simply said, "You can go." She noticed how often he sat outside in the evenings now, in the same spot where Kayamika once told her village stories. Sometimes she would catch him staring out the window, lost in thought, expression unreadable. He was still polite, still respectful. But whatever affection used to be between them was now buried beneath an invisible wall. And deep down, Ngozi knew what was on the other side of that wall. A quiet girl with soft eyes and prayers on her lips. Her mockery of Kayamika grew sharper. "You need to bleach your knees," she told her one morning. "They look like they've been pounding yam all their life." Kayamika only nodded and knelt as usual. But the staff began to notice. The driver stopped laughing at the insults. The cook began leaving extra meat for Kayamika. Even the gate man, who rarely spoke, one day told Ngozi, "Madam, this girl dey try. Make una take em easy." Ngozi ignored them all, but it burned her inside. She had started the war, but it felt like she was losing control of the battlefield. The only thing that comforted her was the belief that Damien would never publicly disrespect her. He was too reserved, too traditional, too focused on his image. She was wrong, but she didn't know it yet. Meanwhile, Kayamika continued to be herself. She washed, she cleaned, she prayed, and she smiled. She didn't know what love looked like. She didn't understand romantic tension. But she knew Oga Damien was kind, and that his silence spoke volumes. When he was around, she felt seen. Not like a servant, but like a human being. But it made her uncomfortable, too. Not because she didn't like it, but because it didn't make sense. Why would a man like that, a man who wore suits even at breakfast, treat her like she mattered? She prayed harder at night, asking God to take away any feelings that are not holy. But the heart doesn't understand logic or morality. It only knows when it's been touched. And Kayamika's heart was now a drum that beat differently whenever she heard Damien's footsteps. The announcement came during breakfast. Damien, seated with his usual black coffee and laptop, cleared his throat and said, "I'll be traveling to Lagos for a 2-day meeting. I'll need one of the house staff to assist with packing and errands." Before anyone could speak, he added, "Kayamika will come." Ngozi froze mid-bite. Her fork hovered in the air. "Kayamika," she asked. "Why not Charles or Rose? They've been here longer." Damien didn't look up. "Charles has a wedding this weekend. Rose is attending to her sick mother. Kayamika will be fine." There was no room for argument. Kayamika, who had been washing plates near the kitchen door, looked up, startled. "Me? Go to Lagos?" she asked quietly. Damien nodded. "Yes. You'll be fine." She nodded slowly, heart pounding. She didn't understand why, but when she looked at Ngozi's face, she knew she had just stepped into a war she didn't start. The trip to Lagos was uneventful on the surface. Damien remained mostly quiet in the car, eyes fixed on his iPad. But Kayamika, dressed in her only clean Ankara blouse and skirt, kept stealing glances at him. They stayed in a guest suite of a hotel, separate rooms, with her only job being to assist with ironing, food arrangement, and carrying documents. But what changed everything was the night they both got caught in the rain. Coming back from the nearby store to buy something Damien forgot, the driver took longer than expected. Kayamika ran ahead, soaked and laughing nervously. Damien followed with an umbrella, frustrated at the delay. But when he reached her at the entrance, he paused. Her clothes clung to her skin, not in a seductive way, but in a raw, vulnerable, human way. She looked up, eyes wide, breathless from running. "Sorry, sir. I didn't want the bread to get soaked." Damien stared at her, not with lust, but with emotion he couldn't contain. That night, Damien didn't sleep. He paced the room, restless. He wasn't supposed to feel this way. She was a maid. His fiancée had brought her. His world was not built for love. It was built for mergers, deals, and contracts. But now, everything felt blurry. And for Kayamika, she lay awake too, wrapped in a hotel towel, wondering why her chest fluttered when he looked at her. She wasn't a child. She could feel it. Something unspoken was growing. Something bigger than prayer. And for the first time, she didn't know whether to run from it or silently hope that whatever it was, it wouldn't stop. The mansion was unusually quiet when Damien and Kayamika returned from Lagos. Even the staff sensed something had shifted, though they couldn't name it. Ngozi didn't come downstairs to welcome them. She remained in her room, pretending to nap, though her ears strained for every sound. Her heart had not rested since Damien's sudden trip with Kayamika. She imagined them in the car, laughing. In the hotel, sharing long glances. At dinner, sitting too close. She pictured things she had never worried about before, not because Kayamika was seductive, but because her innocence was now more powerful than any tight dress or red lipstick. And it was driving her mad. When she finally came downstairs later that evening, she found Kayamika ironing Damien's suit in the laundry room. "So, you now go on trips with my fiancé?" she asked coldly. Kayamika jumped, startled. "Auntie, I was only. Did I ask you to explain?" Ngozi snapped. "You think you've arrived because Olga let you sit in his car?" Later that night, Damien confronted Ngozi in the living room. She was swirling red wine again, the glass trembling slightly in her hand. "Why are you speaking to Kayamika like that?" he asked. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she laughed, low and bitter. "So now you monitor how I talk to my own maid?" Damien's eyes remained steady. "She's not just a maid. She's a human being." That did it. Ngozi slammed the glass down, splashing wine across the table. "You're in love with her, aren't you?" The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire. Damien said nothing. His silence spoke louder than any denial. Ngozi stepped forward, voice trembling. "You let me bring her into this house, into my space, and now you look at her like she's made of gold while I've become a ghost to you." Damien exhaled, long and heavy. "I didn't plan it. But I'm not going to pretend anymore either. The way you treat her is disgusting." Ngozi's eyes filled with furious tears. "You're choosing a maid over me?" He walked away without answering. and that silence broke her more than a slap ever could. Kayamika heard the shouting from the corridor. She didn't mean to eavesdrop, but the voices echoed down the tiled hallway. When she heard her name, her legs trembled. She backed away quietly and ran to the quarters, locking herself inside the bathroom. Tears streamed down her cheeks as shame filled her chest. She didn't want this. She didn't want to be the reason people fought. All her life, she had prayed for peace, not for division. "God, please," she whispered, pressing her forehead to the cold tile. "Don't let me scatter this house. I'll leave if it means they'll be happy again." Her loving heart, so used to sacrifice, already began preparing for an exit, even though she didn't yet realize that her mere presence had stirred emotions too big to be erased. From the morning after the confrontation, Ngozi changed completely. She was no longer pretending. The charm, the smiles, the sisterly tolerance, all gone. What remained was raw bitterness, poured out like hot oil at every opportunity. Kayamika became the target of every jab, every insult, every passive-aggressive remark. "Why are you walking like a princess?" "Oh, I forgot, maybe Olga told you you're special," she sneered when Kayamika entered the dining room. "Don't serve me tea. I don't drink from the hands of traitors." The other staff stood helpless. Some wanted to defend Kayamika, but feared Ngozi's wrath. The power dynamics of the mansion had become toxic, with one woman fighting for her place and another trying desperately to hold on to her dignity. Kayamika bore it all with silence. She cried at night, but during the day, she served like nothing was wrong. She still called Ngozi auntie, still knelt to greet her, still prayed that God would heal the hatred in the air. Damien noticed everything. He saw the way Kayamika flinched when Ngozi entered a room. He noticed the sadness behind her smile, the tiredness in her steps. One morning, when he found her folding napkins alone in the backyard, he sat beside her on the bench. "Is everything okay?" he asked. She forced a smile. "Yes, sir. Everything is fine." He shook his head. "Don't lie to me, Kayamika." Her eyes filled with tears. "I don't want to cause trouble, sir. I just want peace. Maybe if I go back to the village, Auntie will be happy again." Damien's throat tightened. "You didn't do anything wrong," he said. "She's the one being unfair." Kayamika shook her head gently. "But I'm the one who changed everything." Damien reached for her hand, but paused halfway, fingers curling in restraint. "You didn't change anything. You just reminded me of what I've been missing all my life." His voice cracked slightly. Realness. Peace. Heart. Kayamika's chest swelled with emotions she couldn't name. She looked away, tears falling. He left her there with those words, and for the rest of the day, she couldn't stop shaking. Meanwhile, Ngozi's fury only deepened. She began threatening the other staff. "If I hear any of you siding with that bush girl, pack your bags." She sent Kayamika on demeaning errands, asking her to wash already clean plates, polish shoes with her wrapper, clean bathrooms 3 times a day. But Kayamika never complained. Even when Ngozi accused her of stealing soap, she simply knelt and said, "I didn't take it, Auntie, but I'm sorry if I made you think so." The humiliation reached its peak one afternoon when Ngozi slapped her in front of 2 delivery men for looking at her with pride. Kayamika fell to the floor, her lip bleeding, her eyes wide with shock. Damien heard the noise and came rushing out. "What did you do?" he asked. "You're mad, Ngozi," he said. "Completely mad." The staff froze. Ngozi laughed. "Oh, now you defend her publicly? Good. Let the whole world know you've replaced me with your village toy." Kayamika looked at Damien in fear. But what terrified her more wasn't Ngozi's slap, it was the way Damien looked at her, like she was fragile, and like he could no longer hold back his heart. That night, Kayamika packed her bag quietly. It wasn't much, 2 wrappers, a worn Bible, her village slippers, and the blue handkerchief her mother gave her before she died. She didn't want to wake anyone, didn't want a goodbye. She had seen enough. Her lips still throbbed from the slap, but what hurt more was the war raging between her presence and Damien's home. She couldn't understand how her staying here had created so much pain. She had never seduced him, never worn anything tight, never even looked him in the eye for too long. But still, somehow, her being here had caused chaos. As she tied her scarf and reached for the gate keys, she whispered a final prayer. God, let me go quietly. Let them find peace again. She opened the gates slowly, hoping not to be noticed. But Damien was already waiting. He stood at the compound gate, arms crossed, as if he had known all along she would try to leave in the night. Where are you going? He asked. His voice was soft, but his eyes were fierce. Kayamaka bowed immediately. I'm sorry, sir. Please forgive me. I didn't want to disturb anybody. I just want to go back home. Damien stepped forward. No, you're not leaving. She shook her head, her hands trembling. I'm not running away, sir. I just don't want to break your house anymore. Auntie Ngozi, she hates me. The workers are afraid. And I can't stand the pain anymore. Damien's voice cracked. You're not the one who broke anything. I did. I stayed silent for too long. I allowed things to rot. Kayamaka looked up at him, eyes brimming. But I don't belong here. Damien stepped closer. You belong anywhere love finds you. And love has found you here. Kayamaka gasped softly, like the wind had been knocked from her lungs. Her hands clutched her wrapper tighter. Sir, please don't say that, she whispered. You're engaged. You're big. I'm small. You live in a palace. I live in bush. Stop, Damien said gently. Don't shrink yourself for the comfort of others. Silence hung between them. A single tear slipped down her cheek. Damien raised his hand, wiped it away, and stepped back. You don't have to stay because of me, but don't leave because of her. He turned and walked back toward the mansion, leaving the gate open. Kayamaka stood there for a long time, torn between the guilt she carried and the truth her heart didn't know how to accept. Eventually, she closed the gate quietly, walked back inside, and dropped her bag beside the mattress. That night, she didn't sleep, not because of fear, but because something bigger than fear was now stirring inside her. It wasn't until morning came, after a sleepless night, that Kayamaka realized something inside her had shifted. She had returned to the house not because she wanted to, but because Damien's words had cracked something open, something she had tried to hide under blankets of fear and prayer. She moved about her chores slowly, lost in thought, her hands scrubbing floors, but her mind replaying his voice. You belong anywhere love finds you. Those words echoed like drums in her heart, confusing and frightening. How could a man like that, a man born into wealth, power, and influence, say something like that to someone like her? A girl who still tied wrapper at night. A girl who still counted coins to buy recharge cards for her small Nokia phone. She didn't know whether to feel joy or shame. And so she worked in silence, her eyes red, her soul in a quiet storm. Ngozi noticed a change. From her room upstairs, she watched Kayamaka move like a person holding a secret. She could feel the tension rising again, thick and heavy like harmattan air before rain. By the time she walked into the living room and saw Damien sitting beside Kayamaka on the front steps, handing her a plate of breakfast, she snapped. Unbelievable, she hissed, storming down. You're now eating with her? On the steps like equals. Kayamaka stood immediately, almost dropping the plate. I was just, shut up. Ngozi screamed, turning on her. You shameless bush rat. I brought you from your chicken coop, and now you sit beside my fiancé like a queen. Damien rose to his feet slowly, his voice low but firm. Enough, Ngozi. You've humiliated me enough, she barked. If this is about ending the engagement, then say it to my face like a man, not through your eyes at your bloody maid. Damien inhaled deeply, the silence stretching too long. Then he said the words that changed everything. Fine. It's over. The words dropped like a hammer. Kayamaka gasped audibly, her hands covering her mouth. Ngozi stumbled backward, blinking in disbelief. What did you just say? She whispered. Damien didn't flinch. It's over, Ngozi. We've been dragging this corpse of a relationship for too long. Let's bury it before it stinks more than it already does. The entire compound went silent. Even the gardener paused mid-sweep. Kayamaka looked like she might faint. Sir, please. I didn't mean to cause this. she said, voice trembling. Don't blame yourself, Damien replied. You didn't break anything. You only exposed what was already broken. Ngozi stood frozen for several seconds, her lips twitching in rage. Then she turned sharply and stormed back inside, slamming the door so hard a flower vase trembled on the shelf. Kayamika stood frozen, caught between relief and terror, knowing that nothing in the house would remain the same after this moment. The next 2 days were a whirlwind of silence, tension, and whispers. Ngozi locked herself in her room and refused to eat. But that didn't mean she was idle. She was busy plotting, not to win Damien back, but to disgrace the maid she blamed for her downfall. Her pride had been shattered publicly. Her engagement, which had been paraded across social media with filters and fake affection, had crumbled in front of a maid, a girl who didn't even own a proper Sunday shoe. She couldn't stomach it. And so she called a journalist friend, planted rumor, and sent messages to a popular gossip blog anonymously. Billionaire CEO dumps his classy fiancée for illiterate village maid. Alleged pregnancy involved. Within hours, the story was everywhere. Kayamika's name wasn't mentioned, but the description was too clear. Everyone in the neighborhood knew who the maid was. The backlash began immediately. The guards at the gate began treating Kayamika differently. Some of the female staff, fearing association, stopped talking to her altogether. Even the cook began hesitating when serving her meals. It wasn't hatred, it was fear of being next. Kayamika, however, didn't know the full scope until she overheard 2 delivery boys arguing outside the gate. She bewitched Oga, I swear, one said. Nah, Jazz. Ordinary maid. That was when it hit her. She ran inside, confronted Rose, the senior housekeeper, and asked what was happening. Rose hesitated, then finally showed her the blog article on her phone. Kayamika stared at the screen in horror. Her image wasn't there, but her story was. Jesus, she whispered. What have I done? Her legs buckled. She sat on the cold kitchen floor and wept, not because of the lies, but because now even strangers were mocking her. And she had no one to defend her, except the man whose world was now unraveling because of her. Damien was furious when he found out. He stormed into Ngozi's room unannounced. How low can you go? He demanded. You think tarnishing her name will bring back my love for you? Ngozi, still in her silk robe, smiled coldly. I didn't write anything. But even if I did, who would believe the maid over me? Damien shook his head slowly. You really don't know when to stop. No, she said, standing. You don't know what you've lost. I was the best thing that ever happened to you. I matched your status. That girl? She'll drag you into the gutter. Damien's voice rose. And maybe the gutter is better than a mansion filled with pride and cruelty. He walked out, slamming the door. That night, he found Kayamika outside, sitting in the dark, hugging her knees. She didn't say a word. Neither did he. He simply sat beside her, the silence between them becoming its own kind of comfort, a language only pain could teach. Damien had always been a man of logic. Business was strategy. Love was luxury. Marriage was alliance. But in the quiet ruins of what used to be his perfect life, he began to realize that his heart had finally rebelled. He could no longer think his way out of what he felt. Kayamika had never once asked him for anything. No requests. No ambitions. No seduction. And yet, she had opened a door in him that all the suits, all the money, and all the societal expectations had failed to reach. He saw her not just as a maid, but as a mirror. She reflected what he had lost. Softness, sincerity, the kind of honesty that can't be bought. So he made a decision. A real one. Not just to end things with Ngozi, but to choose Kayamika openly. Without apology, without hiding. He waited until breakfast to announce it. The entire staff had gathered for the usual morning routine. Ngozi had stepped out early to meet a lawyer and had not yet returned. Damien stood by the dining table, looked at everyone, and said calmly, From this day forward, Kayamika is no longer a maid in this house. She will no longer answer to chores, insults, or orders from anyone. She is to be treated with the same respect you give me. The silence was deafening. Chiamaka frase. "Sir," she whispered, her voice cracking. Damien turned to her. "You don't belong beneath anyone here. I've made too many mistakes keeping quiet. But not anymore." Kayamika's lips trembled. "But sir, no more, sir," he said. "Not from you." She burst into tears, covering her face with her hands. Some of the staff were stunned. Others smiled quietly. And somewhere in the back corridor, the butler muttered, "Finally." Later that day, when Ngozi returned and learned of the announcement, she shattered 2 glass vases in fury and screamed until her voice was hoarse. She called Damien a disgrace, a failure, a man who had allowed himself to be bewitched by a gutter girl. But Damien didn't respond. He simply signed the final cancellation of their engagement contract and left it on her dressing table. "Let the world talk," he told Kayamika, as they sat on the veranda that evening. "They'll get tired eventually." But Kayamika couldn't stop shaking. Not because of fear, but because for the first time someone had fought for her, chosen her, not in secret, not behind curtains, but out loud in the sunlight before witnesses. She didn't feel like a queen. She didn't feel like a girlfriend. She felt like herself, but no longer invisible. The weight of it all finally fell on Kayamika the morning after Damien's public declaration. While the staff began adjusting to their new reality, some with genuine warmth, others with guarded confusion, Kayamika remained lost in a storm of guilt and disbelief. She stayed in her small room, sitting on her mattress, fingers curled around her worn Bible, whispering prayers that had no form. "God, if this is a test, I'm failing," she said. "I didn't come here to destroy anything. I only wanted to help. I only wanted peace." She felt trapped between the miracle of being seen and the curse of being blamed. She replayed the blog headlines in her mind, the whispers from the house, the shattered glasses Ngozi left behind. And most painfully, the look in Damien's eyes. Not lust, not obsession, but something terrifyingly close to love. She felt unworthy of it. She had no education, no family name, no polished accent. How could she be the answer to a man who once flew first class to Singapore just for a meeting? That afternoon, she wrote a short note, folded it neatly, and left it on the kitchen counter. It read, "Thank you, Olga Damien. But I can't stay. My heart is too heavy. Forgive me." She packed her bag again, quietly, and made her way toward the gate with trembling legs. She wasn't running, not exactly. She just couldn't bear the spotlight, the pressure, the label of maid-turned-wife. Even if Damien loved her, the world never would. As she reached the gate, the driver saw her and shouted, "Olga, Olga." But she pushed the gate gently and stepped into the sun, into uncertainty. She didn't know where she was going. Maybe to the motor park, maybe to the church that once gave her bread. All she knew was that she needed space to breathe. But she didn't get far. Damien's voice cut through the air like thunder. "Kayamika." She froze. Slowly she turned. He was already walking toward her, barefoot, shirt unbuttoned, his eyes wide with disbelief and hurt. "You were going to leave again?" he asked. She opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came. "After everything? After I stood in front of everyone and told the truth? You want to disappear and leave me with silence again?" Her eyes welled up. "I'm not enough," she whispered. "I'll embarrass you. People are laughing already. I don't belong in your world." Damien stepped closer. "Then let them laugh. I'd rather be mocked holding your hand than praised beside someone I don't trust." Her tears fell freely now. "But I'm not ready to be the woman people expect beside a man like you." Damien smiled gently, lifting her chin. "Then don't become who they expect. Be who you already are. That's the woman I fell for. That's the woman I'll stand with, whether she wears wrapper or wedding lace." Her knees buckled slightly, but he caught her, holding her like a man holding home. Weeks passed, and the mansion slowly transformed, not in decor, but in spirit. The shadows that once lingered in corners were replaced with warmth. The tension that poisoned the air gave way to peace. Damien and Kayamika didn't rush to define what they had. There was no sudden announcement, no wedding bells, no glamorous photo shoots. Just time. Time spent sitting under the mango tree in the backyard. Time spent walking to the nearby market hand in hand, ignoring stares. Time spent teaching her how to read contracts, and her teaching him how to roast yam over open fire. It was strange, beautiful, and quiet, the kind of love that grows slowly, like sunrise, not fireworks. Damien's family initially resisted. His mother visited with fury in her voice. "You will throw your legacy away for a village girl," she snapped. Damien replied simply, "Then maybe legacy was never built for love." She left insulted, but slowly even she came to see Kayamika's grace, her gentle confidence, her unwavering heart. The world might mock, but truth cannot be hidden forever. One evening, Kayamika stood at the edge of the compound, watching the sun set in hues of orange and deep red. Damien came behind her, wrapping his arm around her waist. "You're quiet," he said. She smiled softly. "I was just thinking of that first day, when I adjusted my bra beside your car." Damien laughed. "And I thought I'd seen a ghost." She chuckled. "I didn't know anyone was inside." He nodded. "I was inside, but not really alive. Not until you showed up." She turned to him slowly. "I'm still afraid sometimes that I'll wake up and all of this will vanish." He took her hands. "Even if it vanishes, I'll find you again, wherever you go. Because you're not a phase, Kayamika. You're the beginning of every good thing I ever wanted." And there, under the fading sky, he kissed her forehead, not out of lust or pity, but out of deep, knowing love. The mansion never held another engagement party, but guests who visited often whispered that it now felt more like a home than a museum. And whenever they asked about the quiet woman who sometimes sat at the balcony reading a book, they were shocked to hear her name. "Kayamika? You mean the maid?" But they didn't know. They couldn't understand. They hadn't seen the journey. They hadn't heard the prayers. They hadn't felt the silence. All they saw was the end. A woman with her head held high, walking beside a man who had once looked through people like glass. But now he only saw one person, one soul, one woman. And as for Kayamika, she never forgot where she came from. She still knelt to greet elders, still gave the cook extra soup to take home, still prayed at night, hands to heaven, not because she wanted more, but because she had finally been seen and chosen not to spite her scars, but because of them. Thank you for watching this video. What did you learn from this story? Drop it in the comments. Please make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel Tochi Stories for more.